Fall camp is here. Football is right around the corner. We're going to get into the biggest position battles and storylines for fall camp upcoming for Kansas Jayhawks football.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show wherever you get your podcasts and or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking fall camp. We're talking KU football. Fall camp's officially here. Football's right around the corner. We're less than a month from the first game of the season, week 0 versus Fresno State. We're going to get into the top storylines and top position battles for KU football. We'll also get into some of the latest news involving the KU TBT team, as well as some KU basketball news, late night in the fog, and plenty to get to on today's episode of the show. Let's start with fall camp getting going today and the top storylines for KU football. If it feels like it's early for KU fall camp to be starting, I mean, it kind of is. I guess they start a week earlier because of week 0, I would assume. Definitely feels like to me, normally you're used to it being in August, but it's a welcome sight, right? I'm not gonna say no to earlier football. That's a cool part of this. And so I think the top storyline just for, I guess, like these storylines are twofold, right? They're for the season and they're for fall camp specifically, and fall camp is going to breathe into the season, but it's the availability of Jalon Daniels. Like that is the biggest, to me, storyline really all season. And it's one that, did we put it to bed last year by Jalon starting and playing all 12 games for KU? You know, can we move on from the injury stuff? But then again, you go back to spring ball and he misses it with an injury, right? And I don't think it's just about like, will he make it through the season fully healthy? And I hope he does. But it's also about the availability right now, because last year we saw and know that Jalon Daniels, he wasn't just limited in spring ball, he was limited in summer ball. And that kind of carried over into spring ball or into fall camp, I should say, where maybe some of the receivers got injured. And then you're just kind of not on the same page with your receivers, even guys you've thrown to for many previous seasons. And you have to shake some rust off to begin the season. With this year, yes, he did miss spring football, but was back for summer, flew his receivers out, threw to them back in California and LA. And now here for the start of fall camp. Can he be fully healthy for all of fall camp and continue to develop that chemistry with all of his new receivers? Because there are a lot of new ones. And in addition to that, you add in the factor that Bryson Canty, the transfer from Columbia, who, I don't know, he might end up being KU's second best receiver on this year's team. I think Henderson's going to be the first. So Canty might end up being the second. Well, that's a guy who wasn't here for spring ball because he was finishing up his, he was graduating, getting his degree from Columbia. You know, smart decision there to do that. But that means that there's a little bit more on Jalon Daniels to stay healthy and be available in fall camp as well to develop that chemistry with everybody. But yeah, I mean, that goes into the season as well. Can he stay fully healthy? And if he doesn't, what does that mean? Because, you know, you had the luxury a couple of years ago of having Jason Bean as the backup quarterback. Who would be that guy this year? We'll get to that in position battles. I think just in general, kind of piggybacking off that, like, can you avoid any serious injuries during fall camp? Can you get guys the needed, practice time that they need in all this, while avoiding any key injuries that's going to start the season where somebody's going to be behind the 8 ball. I mean, certainly you're already a bit behind the 8 ball here a little bit. If you consider Bryce Foster just had some surgery to clean something up. I don't know how long into fall camp that's going to keep him out, and how does that affect, you know, his chemistry with the team? I will say in Bryce Foster's defense, I do think we saw last year he joined late. Remember, he joined last season after spring football, like well into the summer. And if you remember the early part of fall camp, like there was some, I don't know, scuttlebutt. They're like, oh, is Shane Bumgardner, the other transfer they brought in, like from the, I think it was the D2 ranks, is he going to beat out Bryce Foster, right? Is he neck and neck with him? Is this a real competition? And obviously Foster ended up winning the competition. Maybe some of that was a little lip service to keep everybody, disciplined to the idea of competition. I don't know how true it really was, but we know that Bryce Foster was able to come in a short period of time and earn that starting role. So the fact that he already has a year under his belt, I'm not overly worried unless the injury like leaks into the season and affects his performance. But from a perspective of getting ready for the season, I think he showed last year that he can do it in a shorter period of time. Can they fine tune small details to perform better in one score games? This was something that Lance Leipold brought up during Big 12 Media Days. That was a big focus for KU, right? Finishing games, finishing drives, worried about the small, minute details. And it's something that, some of the players mentioned over the course of last season that, like, you would think with as many returning players as KU had that they would be so, I don't know, ingrained with the system and what Lance Leipold is asking and the minutia to some of the details that's required of them. But you heard some of the players kind of talking about they lost a little bit of that focus maybe earlier on in the season, that they weren't focusing as much on the details. And sometimes that can be like, if you bring a bunch of returning players back, sometimes you do get lulled to sleep a little bit, that you're going through the same process and you're kind of, getting lackadaisical with it, right? And so this year with some new players, I think that can help in that regard a little bit. But can they fine tune those details? Because the difference between you being a bowl team, the difference between you winning 7, 8, 9 games, the difference between you being a Big 12 title contender, those all rely on you performing much better in one score games this upcoming season. How's the offense and the defense going to look with new coordinators? And this is something that we're not going to totally find out in fall camp, but it is obviously apparent. And even if it's not something we're going to know about as much, from like what plays are they calling, what schemes are they running, right? That stuff's not going to really get out there. Like, oh, Kansas ran 5 speed options today in practice versus 17, post routes, or like that's not going to come out to us in the public, that we're not going to totally know. Like, is the defense running some 3-3-5? Are they running all 4-2-5? Are they running some 4-3 in there? Are they right? Like, what exactly are they doing? Are they blitzing a lot? We're not going to know that until we get into the season. But from a perspective of just the guys continuing to kind of mesh with the new schemes, and it's new, but it's like Jim Zabrowski, the terminology, the playbook is probably going to be very similar to where it was with Andy Kotelnicki, but it's still a different guy calling plays. There's still different preferences that he might have in a certain situation. So like getting used to those things, and obviously there are still a lot of other new players that even if it were returning coordinators are going to have to mesh into that. That's today's day and age of college athletics, though. I think which young players start to emerge, and it's not necessarily, when I say emerge, it's not that like a young player, whether you're a freshman, redshirt freshman, sophomore, redshirt sophomore, it's not that player has to find his way onto the 2 deep necessarily. Maybe some cases that is the situation, but for some players, it's more about emerging from a standpoint of like catching the eye of the coaching staff, catching the eye of what you could possibly be, of starting to gain that trust from the coaching staff, because you kind of want to develop that next guy up mentality to a standpoint of, yes, if there's an injury, but also think about this from a roster building, a future roster building perspective. If you're, I don't know, let's just take a position. Let's take like running back, for instance. Okay. There's a bunch of young running backs in the running back room behind Daniel Highshaw and LaShawn Williams that are going to be, I guess, therefore, and we'll get more into this stuff in the top position battles, but like that are going to be contending for, running back 3 and running back 4. But it's not just the importance of that, because how many carries is running back 4 getting versus running back 5? Is there any difference, in what they're going to be getting over the course of the season? But the difference between running back and running back 4 and running back 5 is that once you get into spring ball ahead of the 2026 season, once you get into the offseason, once you get ready for the 2026 season, the guy who was running back 4 this year has a big leg up in terms of they've impressed the coaching staff. And if they can keep doing that stuff, they have that leg up of being consistently in that spot over the next guy. So it's almost like who can emerge for the future rosters in the same way that, like, okay, you think back a couple years ago when like Tommy Dunn and DJ Withers, you would hear stories about, hey, they're emerging in practice. And then maybe later in that season, I forget, this would have been the redshirt sophomore year, I think, they start to get playing time. And then by the time, or maybe this would have been redshirt freshman year, they're starting to get playing time later in that season after starting to emerge. And then they're in big roles, basically starters by the time they're redshirt sophomores, right? That's kind of the timeline you're looking for some of these young players. And it also is important for the coaching staff, because if some of your young players that you recruited in, that you're expecting to develop, that you're expecting to turn into something, aren't doing the things that you are asking them to do, or aren't as good as you hoped for them to be, or aren't developing on the path you wanted them to, then all of a sudden that position becomes more likely to bring in even more players via the transfer portal, versus if they're performing well, maybe you say, hey, we're going to go a little lighter on that position in the portal. So very important there. But let's get into some of those position battles next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. You can get in on the 3M Open going on this week. Gary Woodland, part of that field out in Minnesota. You can get early lines on the KU Fresno State Week 0 game, as well as futures. Who's going to win the Heisman? Who's going to win the Big 12? Who's going to make the college football playoff? Who's going to win the whole dang thing? New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you can make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. All right, top position battles for KU in fall camp that are going to be important coming into the season. We mentioned earlier with the Jalon Daniels health stuff, right? And the hope is that last year was a new precedent, right? That he's going to stay healthy the full way through. If there is a game, or it could even be a drive. That's the thing with backup quarterback, right? Helmet could get knocked off. Who's going to be the backup quarterback for KU? And going back to the young players thing, it's not just important from a factor of if Jalon has to miss any time this year. It's also important because whoever's the backup quarterback this year, now it looks like they have the leg up going into spring ball to get those first team reps, headed into 2026 when that would theoretically be the new starter, right? So it's Cole Ballard, who will be a redshirt sophomore, David McComb, who will be a true freshman, and Isaiah Marshall, who will be a redshirt freshman. Those are the three guys in the competition for backup quarterback. It's going to be a very interesting battle. Ballard has kind of the playbook, the gutsiness sort of factor going his way. Marshall probably has the dynamism of the combination of passing and running ability and kind of the electric gamer that he can be. McComb probably has he's an underrated runner, and maybe he's the most polished passer of the three. They all have their different, strengths, and it'll be very interesting how it shakes out. Now, long-term, maybe a guy like McComb ends up being the guy. Maybe McComb in 2026 ends up being the guy. But maybe this year it takes, him a little bit more time learning the playbook. I think it's even more important almost for Isaiah Marshall to beat out Cole Ballard than it would be David McComb. Again, McComb in his first year on campus, you're going to expect a bigger jump in that second year after you kind of get to know the playbook and stuff. If Marshall now in year 2 at Kansas can't beat out Ballard yet, I do wonder, what that means for his future at the University of Kansas and what that also means for Cole Ballard. Like, would he be the presumed starter coming into 2026? And I like Isaiah Marshall. I hope that, he's able to have a great camp and win out on everything possible. And I think people were really excited when he came to Kansas. And this is a huge moment for Isaiah Marshall these next 4 weeks to try to win this job. And obviously it's something that can bleed into the season, and maybe you become backup quarterback later in the year. But a lot of times, whoever the backup quarterback is, because there's a certain amount of reps that, you're going to get more reps as the 1, more reps as the 2 than the 3 and so forth, that it's going to be a little harder to kind of climb that ladder after you get there. So big offseason for the backup quarterback spot. And I think it would be a good thing. If Ballard is the backup, it's not a bad thing. It could just be that Ballard is outperforming expectations, right? But it would almost be a good thing if Marshall ends up winning the backup. It would not be a good thing if Marshall was just given the backup. But if Marshall earns the backup spot, that would be a good thing, because that tells you that he's starting to progress and show you that he's kind of earning that spot. And same would go for, David McComb, because I think you view McComb and Marshall more so in that vein of they could be our future quarterback starter. Whereas with Ballard, it's okay, he came in as a walk-on. If he can just be a really good backup for the time that he's at Kansas, that's great too, right? But again, maybe I'm underrating him. Maybe, I don't know. Again, the fact that he was a walk-on and earned his way on the field, obviously big reason why was because of injury, but the fact that he even put himself in position to be the third quarterback and that he's fended off to this far, maybe I'm underrating him a little bit too much. But anyway, receiver playing time will be a big one. Like I said, I think Henderson and Canty wouldn't surprise me if they end up the 1-2 on the team, but there's a lot of receiver playing time up for grabs. You have Levi Wentz as well, who he's going to be in that conversation. Cam Pickett, I think the slot receiver position just in general going to be interesting. Cam Pickett, more of your yard after catch guy. Doug Emelian has the experience coming back to the team, more of kind of your underneath route runner. Where does Keaton Kubeka fit into all this? Where does the new player just added from Nebraska, Jaden Doss, where does he fit in? Somebody who is good with the ball in his hands. See somebody who you get on the field for, certain plays, packages, and maybe on special teams a little bit here or there. Very interesting how that receiver playing time kind of works out. And can any of the non-seniors get playing time, like in a real way? Because right now, you look at Henderson, you look at Wentz, you look at Canty, you look at Emmanuel, all those guys are seniors. Can you get somebody like a Pickett in there who maybe has more than just 1 year left, where you feel like, okay, it's not just that you got contributions this year, but you feel like, okay, we've got a good receiver coming back in 2026 as well. The backup tight end spot's very interesting to me. I think Deshaun Hanukkah is pretty clearly the one. Is it going to be Bowden Grown, the transfer from Rice as the backup? Who's going to be a third string then? Is it Leighton Cure? Is it a guy like Carson Brune or Jaden Ham possibly breaking out? Because Kansas likes to play a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets, but you got to have productive second and third tight ends. You can't just throw anybody out there just because if the players aren't good enough, Kansas probably will just play more, 3 wide receiver or 2 running back sets as opposed to doing that. But that'll be very interesting, not just who wins those jobs, but are they good enough that they want to use those formations a good amount? On the offensive line, I think the depth spots are up for grab, and then there's 2 starting spots. I think you look at Bryce Foster, you look at Kobe Baines at the right guard spot, and then you look at Calvin Clements as the left tackle spot. Those you feel confident are going to be the starters. It's who's going to be the left guard and who's going to be the right tackle. So you're looking at, Enrique Cruz, the transfer from Syracuse. I think he would be the presumed favorite to win right tackle. You look at the guard position, that could go, kind of a myriad of different ways. Do you go with a guy like Nolan Gorchika? Do you go with James Livingston, who has some experience, right? Gorchika maybe could play tackle. Maybe Gorchika is your 6th lineman. The KU is typically, under Lance Leipold, use 6 linemen where they rotate one guy in to kind of, keep guys fresh, and basically 6 play around starter snaps. Like maybe that 6th man role is kind of Gorchika because he can play guard or tackle. Amir Herring, does he break out? Like, does one of these young guys, one of these transfers you brought in who was a young transfer who got playing time at a previous stop, do they kind of break out in a real way? I forgot to mention Tavaki Tuago Lavatu. Like, he could be somebody who starts at left guard as a transfer in from UCLA. In fact, he might be the favorite. So, offensive line, going to be very interesting to see how that kind of shakes out. Or do they make some last minute adjustments where it's like, we're expecting, this guy to play here and he ends up playing here instead? It feels like that's happened to the KU offensive line in previous years. It was like, oh, we're expecting this, and then he ends up playing here, and it's like, oh, it ends up working out great, right, for KU. They've done a great job on the offensive line. The defensive end playing time, I think, I guess just in general, D-line playing time, a defensive tackle, it's more about like who's going to emerge as the starters, but I feel like it's going to be 5 guys rotating a good amount. So it's just kind of like who gets the majority of the snaps is the big thing. At defensive end, I feel good about 3 guys playing a big amount of time for KU. Dean Miller, all Big 12 second team, and coming back, Justice Finkley, transfer from Texas, and Alex Bray, transfer from Illinois. Those 3 guys are going to play a lot. Who's going to be your 4th end? Who's going to be your backup, I guess, weak side defensive end? Is it Dak Brinkley, former 4-star recruit who redshirted last year and his body's getting back because he was coming off like a season-ending injury where like he's getting back to being a freak of nature? Like, could he break out in a real way and be a really good rotational player for you, or usurp his way into even more playing time? You've brought in a lot of other interesting young defensive ends, either via high school or via the transfer portal, that have multiple years. Who kind of breaks out there, and who is that other guy that fills kind of 4th defensive end role if you're kind of rotating too deep between that spot? Linebacker starters and usage. I think the usage in general, like, are you going to be playing mostly 4-2-5? Are you going to be playing some 3-3-5? Is it going to be a third linebacker out there? Are we going to see in some of those situations, is it going to be a third linebacker, or is it going to be a third safety, or is it going to be a third corner? And that'll obviously depend, have a bit of an impact on how many players, what's the position battle, like whatever. But then which linebackers win out? So Bengali Kamara is the guy that I feel like is kind of the go-to when I think of like has a chance to be KU's best linebacker, but maybe it could be a guy like Joseph Sipp, who was an all-MAC performer at Bowling Green. Maybe it could be a guy like Trey Lathan, who was a starter at West Virginia in the Big 12 and was coming off a big injury last year and still was relatively productive even doing that, and should, you would think, be even better coming off another year away from that injury. So, like, very good competition. If they're only playing 2 starting linebackers, obviously they'll rotate, so they'll all play. But from a starting perspective, that's 3 guys right there. you're going to rotate down to 2, but then that also doesn't account for guys that you have returning. Could John Brantley, or John Kamara, excuse me, could a Logan Brantley, could a Jason Gilliam emerge and kind of factor into that as well? I think that linebacker spot going to be very interesting. And then the last one here, which young cornerback emerges to be potential cornerback 4? In my eyes, I see with Jalen Todd and then the 2 transfer additions you made, Saeed Gibbs from Georgia Tech and DJ Graham from Utah State, before that Oklahoma, as your top 3 corners. Again, maybe something wins out. And if one of the young corners usurps one of those guys, great, because that probably means that young talented player has had a really good camp, and that would probably be a good sign. But who wins that 4th corner spot? Not just because, there will be a little bit of playing time there. I think back to like Quentin Lassiter, who did he lead Kansas in interceptions? I don't know. He had a good amount of interceptions a couple of years ago, and it was like, okay, you have Kobe, you have Mello, and then you had Kalen Gervin in the slot, and then your 4th corner is Quentin Lassiter. You're still going to get some playing time, right? It might be closer to 10, 15, 20 snaps per game, although in the new formation, new defense, maybe it's more on this year's team for Kansas. So it's not just about a little bit of playing time. It's also about going back to what we said in the top storylines. Which young players emerge? And from a standpoint of like, okay, DJ Graham has 1 more year of college. I can't remember if Gibbs has 1 or 2 more years of college, but let's say it's 1 more year. Who's going to be that other young corner that come 2026 you feel good about starting next to Jalen Todd? Because Kansas has recruited that position really well. They've got a lot of young, talented players there, but it's time for one of them to kind of break out and make you feel like, okay, they're ready for that big playing time role that they've been developing in the system. All right, let's finish up here. Latest news, KU TBT, little KU basketball news as well. We'll get to all that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Again, thanks for joining us on LOJ. Don't forget to make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. The basketball tournament, the Jayhawks team, unfortunately fell in the round of 16, which I think is like 3 straight years that they've fallen in that round. So it's been their bugaboo. I thought they were going to get by them. They were up on a Heartfire. It was like 59-51 or something like that late in the game. And then they just couldn't close it out. And, again, took a lead even in the Elam ending, but then again, couldn't close it out. And it was a tough performance against a really good Heartfire team, but just came up a little bit short. It felt like they were one kind of good guard short. It felt like they were playing with a lot of forwards, a lot of big lineups. They had a lot of turnovers. They struggled to shoot from 3. It is unfortunate. Like, I understand why the Frank Mason thing happened, where he played for Boeheim's Army. I heard a number of what he got to go play for them, and so I could understand why he did that. But it is unfortunate because I think you looked at it and it was like honestly, Jacob Hanna, the Washburn player, I was really impressed with him. He might have been KU's best guard. I thought Tyshawn Taylor looked good when we saw him, but he was obviously very limited in what he could play. He didn't play in the 3rd game for KU. They needed that one other kind of guard for a boost because they had good big men. They had good forwards to get it done. And it's funny because you think of with Bill Self, like you think of some of his most iconic players being guards, and it just feels like they haven't been able to match that. They had Frank last year, but then it was like, oh, but maybe you're missing some of these other things. We'll see. I think they're on the precipice of making this happen. Again, if you make the round of 16 3 straight years, like clearly you're doing well. We'll see if they can get over the hump. I think they're right there. If they can, what if you could get a Devon Dotson? What if you could get a Devontae Graham? What if you could get, one of these guys that could be a total game changer for you in the TBT in addition to what you've already done, which is clearly show that you have kind of a high floor in this event. So unfortunate that they lost there, but another solid run in the end. And I guess most importantly, they did beat the Kansas State alumni team in the second round. That was a wild, stupid finish to that game if you didn't catch it. Okay, some other KU basketball news. Ege Demir, the big man from Turkey, who we talked a lot about, did a deep dive on. He committed to a college. Oregon is where he's going to go. So this becomes interesting because it indicates that, okay, sounds like he is going to be playing college basketball. So this wasn't the case of, KU took Paul Mbia because they were worried they could get Demir eligible. I guess that is a worry. Like maybe Oregon just felt better about getting him eligible and found out a way, and maybe it was a risk that Kansas wasn't willing to take and they couldn't afford to because they didn't have a bunch of other bigs on the roster. But it would be very interesting to track him at Oregon. And the other interesting part is the rumored schools that were in on Mbia after he, I guess, asked out of his NLI from NC State was Oregon and Kansas. So I think it's going to be very interesting to track both how Mbia does and how Demir does this season. I think both of them are going to be backup centers because Oregon has a really good big man in I think Nate is the first name, Nate Biddle, who's a really good post scorer for Oregon. Going to be very interesting to track how both those guys do. And, whatever happened there between that battle. Other KU basketball news, Late Night in the Fog has been scheduled for October 17th. So that means that we are less than 3 months away from Late Night in the Fog. And then the last bit that I wanted to mention here, we do have, once again, one final, I guess, mention of this, our trivia at Johnny's Tavern in West Lawrence coming up on Sunday at 6 o'clock. Doors are going to open at 5 o'clock. I think we have like 12 teams, 13 teams, something like that, registered at this point. I know it's double digits at this point in time. It's going to be KU basketball trivia. It's going to be in a fun way. It's called Smackdown is how we do the tournament. And, we're going to be giving away, bonus prizes. There's going to be apparel, gift cards from Johnny's. There's going to be a cash prize at the end. It is a cash entry, but all of the money goes to the cash prize. I ain't taking a dime of it, right? So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I guess last minute signups, if you would. You can have a team up to 6 people. And at the very least, it's a lot of fun. You get to maybe meet some other KU fans, and you might have some friends that are going to it. So highly recommend coming out Sunday if you can. And if you know some things about KU, and that's the beauty though of having a team of 6, you could know very little, but like if you have like 2 friends who are like studs about it, just invite them and the rest of you have a good time and ride their coattails. Like, we just see the team score. We don't need to know who did well individually. So anyway, I hope to see you Sunday, and plenty more coming at you right here on Locked On Jayhawks later in the week. We're going to have a KU non-conference preview, including the Missouri game, as well as the Fresno State and the Wagner games on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll see you then right here, anywhere you get your podcast, or on our YouTube page with LOJ.